Hey everyone, I'm Kate Reddy. I'm with DNPAO's Early Care and Education team. Welcome to our weekly program and evaluation networking call for the SPAN, HOP, and REACH programs. Today we're going to be talking about health equity within the early care and education setting. And I'm going to be doing a brief overview of levers that we've seen around health equity across our early care and education portfolio. So that includes SPAN, HOP, and REACH programs. It includes our Farm to ECE programs, which we refer to as FIG and CABBAGE, which are managed through the Association for Public Health Nutritionists. And it also refers to our work through Nemours, our springboard funding training opportunities. And our second speaker today will be talking about health equity trainings that have been offered to state level early care and education teams through the Institute for Public Health Innovation. So without further ado, I'm gonna go over what we're seeing currently around health equity levers and just this space in general. So the literature continues to grow around the impact of quality early care and education programs. It can have an impact really across the life spectrum in a variety of areas that's been demonstrated beyond just our areas of direct interest within DNPAO, which is obesity prevention and chronic disease prevention. We also see an impact on education, crime, employment, income, drug use, blood pressure, and many more areas. So the formative years really are this tremendous equity lever for the entire lifespan and a tremendous opportunity to work in a cross-sectoral manner as well. These are some of the kind of 9 existing themes that we're seeing around health equity across our portfolio training, including the state level equity trainings, with which the Institute for Public Health Innovation will be talking about later. Coalition diversification in a variety of ways. And our first speaker, our Farm to ECE recipient out of Washington, D.C., will be talking about their journey around that. Child and adult care food program mapping, and I have an example to show you a little bit later. That's also one of our Nemours springboard auxiliary funding opportunities. And then several states have taken various health equity analysis tools. IPHI has one that they've developed and they work with states on, and they'll talk about. The National Farm to School Network has one. And states are applying those to state policies, to programs, to initiatives, to apply a health equity lens kind of across the board. And then kind of tied into CACFP mapping and other strategies that address food insecurity, whether that's through Farm to ECE or it's through SNAP or WIC. We see a variety of states looking at food insecurity through different lenses and approaches. And there's actually a recent paper that just came out linking food insecurity in the formative years to higher BMI at an early age. So it's becoming more and more apparent just how important it is for all of us to work in a cross-sectoral manner. State strategic ECE plans. This is also kind of using a health equity analysis approach, but toward a comprehensive ECE plan. And then trust building and linguistic and cultural adaptations. And here we have a few examples. This is our Nemours managed springboard opportunity around CACFP mapping, or Child and Adult Care Food Program, in partnership with Child Care Aware. And so here you see with the bullets the layers of data that are pulled in across the state to look at which communities could be really focused upon to have the greatest impact around CACFP participation. And this is what one of the maps looks like. You see that kind of hot spots around high or low participation rather in CACFP, and this is Louisiana. So you see East Baton Rouge and parts of New Orleans being highlighted, and then you'll see other layers of the map that touch upon poverty level and food deserts. So lots of potential to coordinate across food systems work and early care and education work there. And then this is an example of Washington State in particular. So it's one of the resources that they've highlighted on a page at the top, which collates resources around cultural and linguistic adaptations of early care and education resources. And I've highlighted just a few of them here. And then that's kind of my brief overview that I wanted to share around what we're seeing, and we're doing a lot of thinking also as we look forward into the future around early care and education from DNPAO standpoint. But today I'd love to introduce our speakers, and I'm going to do them one at a time. So first, we're going to welcome Washington, D.C.'s FIG team, stands for Farm to ECE Implementation Grant, managed out of an Association for Public Health Nutritionists. So we have Martine Hippolyte and Taylor Coble speaking today. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can more formally introduce them and read their bios, and they can pull up their slides. One second before you start talking, I want to formally introduce you. Okay, so Martine, as Director of Community Engagement for Fresh Farm, which is one of the organizations that primarily is part of the Washington, D.C. FIG or Farm to ECE team. Fresh Farm is a local food systems nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. Martine Hippolyte remains energized to be leading community engagement efforts that help create a more just and equitable food system. Martine is primarily responsible for providing leadership and management in the development, planning, and coordination of community councils, outreach, technical assistance, and education programming. Martine remains most proud of the meaningful and trusting relationships she has built with various stakeholders and think partners on behalf of her organization and her team. And Taylor Coble, as a native Washingtonian, Taylor believes her city deserves to be well-nourished, empowered to grow its own food, and sustainable for everyone. She gives back to the city that helped make her who she is today by supporting Fresh Farm's food access and food education efforts in schools, early care education centers, and in vulnerable communities. Welcome, Martine and Taylor.
Thank you, Kate, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for having us today. We're super excited to be here. So we're just going to start it off and get started. So today we're going to be presenting on what does equity look like. This is a presentation about the reconfiguration of our Farm to ECE coalition. There we go. So here's our rough agenda for today. We're going to do a brief introduction of who Fresh Farm is and who our community engagement team is. We'll talk a little bit about how our coalition started and how it pivoted and how those pivots turned out to be incredibly meaningful. We'll give you a sneak peek from one of our providers about their feelings about our coalition, and then we'll also give you a little teaser of what's to come next. So who is Fresh Farm? Kate mentioned that Fresh Farm is a DC-based nonprofit, and Fresh Farm really is committed to 3 pillars and 3 bodies of work. So we have our food economy. Fresh Farm operates over 30 producer-only farmers markets in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And we're super proud to be able to accept nutrition benefits at all of our locations. We have our food education program, which is Food Prints, which is a hands-on engaging program that teaches kids where their food comes from, how to cook it, how to grow it, and how to just appreciate a lifestyle rich with fresh fruits and vegetables. And then we have our food resiliency program, which is our pop-up food hub. So we're really taking advantage of the convening power of the farmers market by providing wholesale opportunities to customers and clients all across the city. And Fresh Farm's community engagement team, which Martine so lovingly leads, really bridges the gaps between our food education and our food access programs. So we're really recognizing that just because you give someone food, whether it's free or subsidized, doesn't really matter if they don't know what to do with it. So we're really centering community voices, hearing from our communities about what they want, engaging new and existing partners in holistic solutions, facilitating community-driven coalitions, and also providing training, technical assistance, and coaching sessions. And this is our team. Just have to say, initially when we started this body of work, it was just Martine and I. So it's really exciting to see how big our team has gotten. We have our community food educators, which are really peer educators in their community, helping parents just like themselves figure out how to use fresh fruits and vegetables. There's me, there's Martine. We've got a lot of people. So I'll turn it over to Martine now, and you'll hear from me soon.
Thanks so much, Taylor. I also get gleeful at seeing how big our team is now and how many people we have invested in doing this work. But with no other, I don't want to have you guys waiting a minute longer. Let's talk about this coalition. Fresh Farm, in partnership with the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, were awarded this wonderful opportunity by way of CDC and ASPHN with two goals in mind for our particular team. One was to design and deliver capacity building curriculum to EC providers in the city about farm to EC programming. And then two was to build an interagency multi-stakeholder coalition that would inform that curriculum and tools for our EC partners. And really the main underlying objective was for us to diversify representation of farm to ECE planning and resource development to involve the voices of those most underrepresented, usually in decision-making spaces. So how we started, we all got together. We were super eager. Taylor, I don't know if I'm taking you on the ride. We were super eager. We were super excited. We were super well-meaning. And with all the love in our hearts, decided that we were going to have 90-minute virtual meetings with all our interagency, multi-stakeholders in a space. We would have group discussions, group activities, lectures, presentations, and all the pre-work one would need to be able to fully participate in the space. We also made sure that we let our EC providers know that, we wanted to reinforce their feelings. We wanted to uplift them. We wanted to empower them to use the space to share how they felt and the needs of their community. And so also in that space, again, that last bullet point, we had government agency officials, we had farmers, and we had, of course, the community members, a couple parents too, and I think an evaluator. So that's how it started. And so, yeah. And we had a few of these meetings and quickly realized something was in fact off. One being the EC providers were completely silent in the meeting space. When I tell you completely silent, I mean, you could hear a pin drop from the EC provider screens. And it was clear that there was some power dynamics there within the space, which we didn't jump to that conclusion. We let a few months go by before we decided, okay, maybe this is a thing. Attendees did not seem to address the pre-work at all, not even a little bit, not even an ounce. We also noticed with each meeting, we started strong, and each meeting there were less and less people coming. That was noticeable. Also, we realized with the agendas, we had these super lofty, again, built with love agendas that weren't really translating with the absence of like the interpersonal relationships, and quickly realized that putting the spotlight on providers during coalition meetings wasn't actually conducive to fostering uncensored input. If anything, it kind of felt like they were on display and probably enhanced the discomfort that EC providers were feeling.
So instead of continuing with something that did not feel good for us, and from the feedback we gathered from participants didn't feel good to participants, we took a break. And there's absolutely no shame in taking a break when you want something to really be productive and meaningful. And so that's what we did. We took a little bit of a break. So we temporarily stopped our coalition meetings. I think we had like a month and a half break where we really just went to the people who were in the meetings and said, okay, is this working for you? If it's not, what's not working and what can we do to make it work? And so, yeah, we synthesized a bunch of different feedback from our policymakers, from our government agency stakeholders, and also the providers. And what we heard was, especially from our government agency stakeholders, they're like, okay, we want to know what's happening in this meeting. I don't have a lot of time, so I want this space to feel productive. And then from our providers, we heard, this is feeling like we're on display, this timing doesn't work, this format is so long. And so we created our subgroup that was just with ECE providers. And we really did this to build trust, rapport, and really we wanted to center, amplify, and empower these coalition members. And so we really wanted that small space to do that. We also changed the meeting times. People who have a regular 9-to-5 job are not on the same schedule as ECE providers. And so our meetings are at nap time, which may not make the most sense for our schedule, but this is a coalition space for our members. And so we changed the meeting time. We provided a stipend because time is money and we all recognize that. And if you really want someone to show up and bring that energy, sometimes that monetary appreciation is the best way to show that. We also made sure that everyone who was in our larger coalition was still looped into everything that was going on. But instead of joining a meeting, we just sent out a monthly newsletter and people were free to respond back and forth. And then we also eliminated the pre-work. If it wasn't getting done, why are we adding it? And so this is kind of like how we pivoted, how we started, what we learned in a nice synthesized chart format. So Martine mentioned we started with these 90-minute meetings. We shortened them. We made them smaller. We made them more personalized. Yeah, we can send this out later if anybody wants to know like the nuts and bolts, but I'm going to keep it going. And so our meeting style changed drastically. We went from 50 coalition members to 8 to 10. And so the group was small and intimate, and all of these bullet points, we really just set the tone with our group norms and expectations. Some of the things that our coalition members asked was for Martine and I to bring the energy consistently. They said they didn't want to be lectured, they didn't want to be talked to. And so we really tried to create a vibe with our group norms. We had lots of interactive and full light lift and heavy lift moments. So some silly, easy things for people to give feedback on, and then some more critical, in-depth reflection type feedback as well. Transparency and honesty. We really built in more intentional time for group building and storytelling. So every single one of our coalition meetings opens with a very silly, nebulous, crazy, weird group builder. And it's a great opportunity to just hear people's voices and bring everyone into the fold and just realize we have so much more in common than we know. And then the most important part is that we really recognize that our providers are the experts. And so really just honored their lived experience and really tried to center and focus that. And our meeting focus, it wasn't like our big coalition, we're like, this is the agenda, this is the agenda. We kind of let the group build that out. And so we started with what is farm to ECE. While doing this work, we have really realized that everybody's definition of farm to ECE is so different. And so we wanted to start with that baseline understanding. Then we went into how is it implemented? What are the barriers? You'll notice that we had 2 meetings dedicated to barriers because there were that many. And then the 5th meeting, what are the recommendations? Okay, I'm going to show you this video. So instead of us recapping to you how great our coalition pivot was, we figured we'd actually show you one of our providers who was in our large group and then move to our smaller group so that you can see from her.
I think sometimes the major difference with this like larger group and smaller group is that people who attend the larger group tend to be individuals who kind of develop the framework or like the big picture items, the planning of what should be done, like, and then in the smaller group we kind of address where those challenges are. So if we have like this grant project or if we have this certain goal as, you know, DC farm to ECE, I think with the smaller group we tackle and I know Martine and Taylor have been great with kind of addressing those needs of like, what are we doing currently? How can we improve? What are the challenges? And what resources do we need as providers, as the people who are running the programs to make this happen? So I think it's best, well, I think the benefit of the smaller group is to address kind of those items, and in larger coalition meetings is kind of like goal oriented, like what are we here for, like what are we doing, kind of developing that framework based on our geographical location, based on the resources as DC as a whole, and then smaller scale depending on our capacity as well. So I think those are the major two differences that I've seen with these types of groups.
Yeah. If I can follow up on that, Andrea, do you think there should be like a merger of the two, or like more of a flow between the larger structure and the smaller structure to be able to, I guess, garner different goals and interests and stuff?
I think sometimes a smaller group has, I don't know, I just think about all these like conversations with Farm to ECE. I think it brings a lot of individuals to the table and having voices heard, who usually are not heard or not part of these larger places. And personally, my experience, I usually don't talk or speak out in these larger meetings. So having a smaller group kind of helps me to kind of express myself and express our situation in Central Meow or how we approach things. So personally, I don't feel comfortable sometimes to even share in a larger setting. I think sometimes if it's a merge, it helps out to have breakout groups sometimes, but it's not the same level of time frame. Like it's not an hour of breakout groups. It might be like 15 to 20 minutes.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for the clarity. I appreciate that. I saw a few heads shake no as well. Feel free to jump in if you like.
I think sometimes the major.
Let me just go back to full screen. There we go. So I love that video because she just highlights so much of what we're going for. And so who you saw in that video, that was one of our evaluators, Drew Bonner, conducting a focus group. And so we actually had a 21-page evaluation report coming out of this. And these are just some quotes that the evaluators captured just about how the small group structure really increased participation and just like really created the vibe. And so I want to be respectful of our time. So I'm going to leave this here. If anyone would like us to share out our evaluation report later, we're more than happy to do that. Martine.
Yes, thank you. Got it. Thanks so much. Yes, so again, to respect time, we're going to kind of breeze through these last couple of slides. But yeah, our equity-centered approach really, I mean, what I can really center this on is, you know, those closest to the problems or closest to the solutions. And we try to center that with everything that we do, with every move that we make. You know, we're really trying to foster these relationships, build communication and build trust to where we get that transparent feedback and guidance and don't have to go back and redo the things that we did. And of course, I threw the financial appreciation at the end because it really does make people feel like they're doing a job. They're showing up to share. So that in tandem with the trust building really knocks it out of the park. So moving forward, we still are meeting with the subgroup, the subgroup of ECE providers, so that smaller group, we're still meeting with them. That subgroup is kind of taking a leadership role and decides the topic and direction for the larger coalition space. We also have the goal of having more focused coalition meeting topics with more intentional stakeholder invitees. What that means is, for instance, our next meeting is going to be about safe outdoor spaces and growing spaces. So in that meeting, you know, we're going to want the Department of Parks and Recs and nonprofits that specialize in growing and outdoor spaces, and maybe government agency staff that help with field trips and other outdoor spaces to enjoy. So just having a targeted types of topics that we let the EC providers kind of dictate with very light guidance from us. Also optional working groups. And then lastly, we're really trying to move into the ECE providers taking a leadership role, being co-facilitators with us. We're not there yet, but we hope that at the end of the term, we have ECE providers that are leading us as we sit back and not relax, but you get what I'm saying. And so, yeah, any questions, screenshot this, feel free to email myself at martine@ffm.org or taylor@ffm.org. And I'm so sorry, Kate, for us going over. Thank you.
No apologies at all, please. That was really wonderful, Martine and Taylor. Thank you so much. And we are gonna have the full Q&A verbally at the end after our second speaker, but please either start putting your questions in the chat box or go ahead and write them down, because we don't want to lose those thoughts as they're bubbling up. So now we will transition to our second speaker organization, which is representing Institute for Public Health Innovation, IPHI, which has done equity trainings at the state level for cross-sectoral ECE teams. So this is a CDC DNPAO funded effort managed through Nemours. And today we have Mike Royster. Dr. Royster's career has spanned clinical medicine, environmental epidemiology, community health, health policy, health equity, and racial justice. He is currently the Senior Vice President for Institute for Public Health Innovation, a member of the National Network of Public Health Institutes. Prior to IPHI, he served in various public health positions, the Director of the VDH Office of Health Equity, Director of the Crater Health District, President of the Virginia Public Health Association, Epidemiologist for the Environmental Protection Agency, and Postdoctoral Fellow in the Kellogg Community Health Scholars Program. And we also have Abby Charles, who currently serves as Program Director at IPHI. In this role, she works with a variety of sectors and stakeholders, including elected officials, health departments, planning agencies, and community-based organizations, and other key stakeholders to design and implement policy systems and environmental change. With over 15 years of experience as a public health practitioner, she provides expertise and oversight for an extensive portfolio of health equity-focused programs. Welcome, Mike and Abby.
Thanks, Kate. Good afternoon, everybody. I will start us off and then I'll pass it to Abby in a few minutes. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. We're going to talk about our work as an equity consultant for Nemours over the last several years, funded through, of course, the CDC to support their ECE work. As Kate mentioned, IPHI is a public health institute. We're a nonprofit organization based in the Maryland, DC, and Virginia area. Our work is really grounded in a commitment to health equity and racial justice. And we serve a number of roles, both within our region and across the country, as a convener and backbone, supporting organizations to hire and deploy staff, fiscal sponsorship, and other capacity building activities, as well as have programmatic expertise in the field of community health workers, community health improvement planning, food policy, healthy housing, healthy communities, and our equity training and technical assistance portfolio, which obviously ties into our work with Nemours. On the next slide, before jumping into the details around our work with Nemours, we did want to just give kind of a background on our equity training and technical assistance. And the core of that is our Healthy and Equitable Communities curriculum, which we developed within IPHI and which recently won a national award from the National Network of Public Health Institutes for elevating practice. We started to develop this curriculum back in 2013, 2014, and ultimately developed what exists today as a 16-hour core curriculum that really delves into various aspects of health equity. And obviously, over the last several years, we've been delivering this training virtually. And so we've broken it typically into 2 or 4 hour modules that are focused on adult learning and are very interactive. Really a big focus of our work is to not only impart knowledge and understanding of the principles of equity, but to really connect that to the practical application of those skills and tools so that organizations, coalitions, and others can effectively support and promote racial equity as well as broader aspects of equity as well. Really, when we started building this curriculum, we didn't have a particular audience per se, but we knew that this was something that was needed both in our region and around the country. And so as we created this curriculum based on our experience, our interactions with experts around the country, NACCHO and ASTO and others at that time who were really kind of at the forefront of this work. And then also the research that was out there. This curriculum came to be, and we initially then started to work with local partners, local foundations, and local health departments to provide training and technical assistance. So looking at the overarching objectives of this curriculum, as I mentioned, part of it is really to help people understand the core concepts and principles of equity, as well as the root causes, to be able to translate that into developing strategies to intentionally promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and do that partially through being very intentional in developing diverse and inclusive partnerships, and then ultimately applying various tools, which I'll talk about in a minute, to really help both at the organizational level, the programmatic level, and in terms of interactions among partners and stakeholders to create strategies that are upstream focused and equity centered. Our curriculum consists of 5 core modules. The overview is where we create a baseline in terms of people understanding definitions, concepts around equity, how data reinforces and displays inequities that we see both in terms of health outcomes as well as social determinants of health. And then thinking about root causes and how, what are the underlying factors within society that shape the distribution of social determinants across populations. So we start to explore issues around racism, classism, and other forms of oppression. And then we get more into the idea of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and understanding differences, understanding the levels of oppression that affect individuals and communities. And then in module 3, we really connect that then to communities and how we create a voice or a space really for communities to be equal partners in identifying the priorities and the solutions for communities. An integral part of that is that we intentionally focus on power dynamics and how they play out at this community level, as well as how they play out in terms of the coalitions that we develop with communities. And so in this case, with our ECE coalition partners, really looking at the power dynamics within their coalitions and the power dynamics between those coalitions and the communities they serve. Module 4 focuses on how to effectively communicate equity to decision makers. So that is a part of our strategy and the strategy of the partners we work with, how developing tools and approaches to communicating to elected officials, governmental leaders, et cetera, to build momentum around promoting equity. And then ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, our curriculum is really intentionally focused on practical applications. And so, combining our focus on root cause analysis and understanding the levels of oppression, thinking about power dynamics, et cetera, we also share and work with the partners utilizing an equity impact review tool. And so help them to walk through the tool itself and then to apply it to specific policies or strategies that they as ECE coalitions are working on as a part of their ongoing work, so that then this commitment to equity can be tied back to the work that the coalitions are actually involved in. And so kind of circling back to Nemours, our partnership with Nemours started in 2018. And since then, as I mentioned, we've been brought on as an equity consultant and worked with, as you can see, coalitions really in various parts of the country to provide this core 16-hour training, as well as follow-up technical assistance to many of these partners to help operationalize the concepts and tools that we discuss in the training. Just to give a few quick examples of some of the partnerships that we've been involved in. We've worked in Florida for a number of years, first with the Florida Association of Healthy Start Coalitions, where we conducted our 16-hour training. And then we, as a follow-up to that, and really as an outgrowth, their work focused on a community in the Orlando area where there were significant inequities around child well-being. And we facilitated a follow-up workshop with that audience, which was much more parents and grassroots community leaders, because they felt that the initial training had been so useful and could be useful for this local community too. In Kansas, we've been working with folks there at the Child Care Aware of Kansas, I guess for the last 2 years or so. Again, we completed the core 16-hour workshop with the statewide Child Care Aware of Kansas coalition. And as a result of that, they recognized that the Eastern Regional Coalition could also benefit from this workshop. And so we conducted a follow-up workshop with them. And since then, we've had an ongoing technical assistance partnership where we've helped them in a number of ways in terms of moving both equity products as well as kind of their broader focus on equity and sustaining that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes as well. And then as a third example, in Georgia, again, we worked with their statewide ECE coalition that was a part of the Nemours work and conducted that training. And what we found was that there's actually a kind of a range of experience of folks who were a part of that training, which created a different dynamic, as well as added to the learning opportunities, because one of the things that we found in our work is that not only is it valuable to bring to the table the concepts and tools, also the experiences of the participants in the group are really valuable as there's that co-learning that goes on. And so this was really an example of that. And as a follow-up to that, again, that group felt like there was value in having ongoing support as they moved equity forward. And so we did have a follow-up training with them that they had actually found additional funding to support after their technical assistance through Nemours had been utilized. So really, some examples of state coalitions that found the work to be valuable, and so much so that they often either engaged other partners in the state and or identified other funding streams to help provide continued training. So with that, I'll pause and turn it over to Abby to talk a little bit more about our technical assistance and our outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, one of the things that we've recognized over the years is that beyond just receiving one 16-hour training, many people need additional support with being able to implement the tools and implement strategies to become more equitable in their work. We've seen that with so many of the requests we've received from people who've received our Healthy and Equitable Communities training and from others who are seeking technical assistance. There are just barriers that organizations face post-training. Some of it is connected to the ability to prioritize equity work. Especially during COVID, right, where it was challenging to find staff time to prioritize resources for equity. In other circumstances, it's lack of funding or resources or buy-in from leadership. Sometimes organizations might struggle to build consensus as a coalition or even across the leadership or management team for that coalition about what equity practice should look like, right? Level setting across the coalition could sometimes be difficult. And sometimes, group a specific barrier thing and really applying it to their unique circumstance to resolve the issue. That sometimes requires taking a deeper dive into some of the concepts, right? So some state coalitions have brought us in to support their strategic plan. And we've used many of the tools from the training, but really coached those coalitions through how to use those tools to take that deeper dive. So, for example, Child Aware of Kansas We've worked with them to develop a full-time health equity consultant position. And we've also worked to introduce health equity concepts to their board, and conducted a root cause analysis of child health outcomes. With Keystone Kids Go in Pennsylvania, we've supported with their work as they've tried to incorporate equity through the development of a steering committee. And we've provided technical assistance on applying equity impact tools into different documents and programs that they've been developing, as well as helping them to think about how to integrate equity as a new subcommittee. So developing an equity committee as part of their coalition as well. So that technical assistance has really proven to be a critical aspect of that training. So as we move to the next slide, just some quick outcomes, because I'm sure we are running on time as well. What we have seen, of course, from the training itself, many people, have a mix of experience as they come into our training, right? So their exposure to equity training and work has varied across states, and even within coalitions and organizations, we see a significant variance in the level of training that people might have or level of understanding of equity. And more often than not, people have already completed a training on equity or have engaged in some of this work in the past. But even still, many of the coalitions that we work with have tried to integrate equity in their work plans in the past, but are still looking for additional assistance and support to integrate more equity tools into their work. So what we've realized is that theoretical knowledge does not always translate to actionable experience or working knowledge. So while people understand the concepts of equity, they don't always understand how to apply or operationalize them in the work, or even to build the consensus to operationalize those concepts in their work. So, our pre and post tests have shown that there's a general increase in knowledge as a result of participating in our training. And as well, people are definitely satisfied with what they've gained, both from the facilitators and the material. So, this slide includes some of the quotes that we've received as a result of the training. And this first quote really focuses on the tools that they've received from the training and what they could do within their organization to move equity along and really operationalize it. Just some highlights that have come out of our technical assistance. As we said, we've seen that some organizations face those barriers once they've completed training, but in Alabama, as a result of our training and some technical assistance, they've focused equity work on their Farm to ECE coalition, and they've really dedicated time at each meeting to equity. They recruited childcare providers from 3 different programs as well. In Georgia, they revised the Georgia Nutrition and Physical Activity Assessment and the Farm to ECE strategic plan using IPHI's equity review tool. Iowa continues to engage in racial equity work through their Farm to ECE work. Their Farm to School and Early Care Coalition released a pilot Local Food Makes Sense, a 10 cents a meal reimbursement program. And we continue to work with Iowa, not through the Nemours program, but also to provide technical assistance with their racial equity committee as part of their coalition. Kansas engaged 25 early childhood systems in equity work and developed an equity-focused issue of their Kansas Child magazine. And as you've seen, we continue to work with Kansas as well for technical assistance. So I'll pass it to Mike to share some of the lessons that we're learning as we are working on equity.
Thanks, Abby. Let's see, where are we? Lessons learned, yes. So I think some of the things that we've, recognized over time, both from our standpoint and from the standpoint of the states that participate, a few things. One, it's really important for the coalitions to have a sense of their capacity, both there's usually a lead organization's capacity as well as the capacity of the coalition to one, simply participate in the training because it does have a significant amount of time requirement for it, and then to be able to really commit to making changes in their coalition and their work. As I'm sure we all know that even the expressed commitment to equity can really be undermined if we don't follow through on it, even if it's because we don't have the capacity. It's really important that before we start on that journey, that we know that we can continue to make progress through it. And so assessing both the organizational capacity as well as the cultural and power dynamics, both within the coalition and in the broader public arena. As we know, many states are going through very different political situations that affect their ability both to participate in training as well as to potentially affect change. And so thinking about those things in advance. I will say that I think Abby may have mentioned as well that we do conduct a kind of a screening interview, so to speak, where we talk with the leads from each state to get a better sense of their priorities and the dynamics of their coalition, as well as the broader culture in the state where they're located, to get a sense of their readiness and in terms of how we will want to shape or frame the approach to the workshop content. As always, being adaptable is critical as we make adjustments, in the planning and the implementation. And then for the coalition, sometimes what we find is that as they go through the process, they really need to recognize they need to make a big shift in how they're viewing their work. Oftentimes that's around who's at the table in their coalitions and how they can be more intentional about broadening the voices. And so that adaptability is really critical in equity work. One of the things also, because this is a very interactive type of workshop, and sometimes people assume that if something's on video, it's more passive. We really try to set the stage up front for people to come prepared for an interactive, 16-hour workshop that is virtual. But again, we're trying to utilize adult learning theory and other tools to make it very interactive. And so we really thrive, and I think the group thrives on that interaction and learning from each other. In terms of how we then work with the groups to apply the concepts to their actual work, we really want them to think about, what are some of the opportunities that we have as a coalition? What are our current priorities, et cetera? And how can we connect those with this equity content so that when we get to the action planning phase, the work is very relevant to what they're doing and they can continue the work on their own, or if they have a need for additional technical assistance, the technical assistance is tailored to what their priorities are as a coalition. Again, setting expectations, as I mentioned earlier, and then we really try to be very creative in our facilitation strategies and use a lot of tools like Jamboard, breakout groups, things like that, to make it very interactive, as we found that really helps to keep the group engaged. The importance, Abby, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. So just some of the things that we've realized as we go, and then we'll close out. But related to the importance of the work, these CDC initiatives help to build capacity and really help organizations keep a focus on addressing health equity concerns at the state and local level. Without this funding, without the support for technical assistance, sometimes, equity could easily be forgotten, or we just continue to operate at status quo. And when equity is not intentionally addressed, it is often the piece that falls by the wayside. So inequities continue to prevail when we're not able to focus on equity. So these initiatives are so essential. And while there's a lot of interest in EDI right now, especially since 2020, there is still a limited understanding of how to operationalize it. So there's a significant need for additional technical assistance, additional deep dives into the content, to ensure that organizations have the support that they need to really move the needle beyond just understanding the theories and understanding the concepts as it relates to equity, health equity, racial equity, but really how do we begin to shift and create changes in our communities? Health equities are persistent, which really reinforces that our traditional approaches have not been effective. So we must focus on the root causes such as poverty, racism, related policy systems, and environmental changes that will be necessary to really create structural change and to support having as thriving a community as possible when we think about early childhood education, farm to school, and so much more. We really have to shift the needle in how we approach this work. So it's so critical, and we've appreciated every moment that we've worked with these states to grow this work. So with that, I think I'm going to close and open up for questions. We'll pass it to Kate to open it up.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Mike and Abby. Really appreciate that. You gave us a wealth of information and a lot to think about too. Our team actually had to step away. So we have 10 plus minutes for anybody interested in staying past the hour. We have until 3:15 or so to discuss and ask specific questions. While people are thinking and putting questions in the chat box, and or please consider saying hi and showing your face and speaking up. We'd love to hear your questions verbally. I'm just going to share a few thoughts while people are thinking. So we did have a few resource requests. One, Taylor, you already addressed, which was for the evaluation report from Fresh Farm. So it looks like people can access that. So thank you for doing that. And then we will also send out the slides. So Taylor, I don't know if that table that you included in your slides is also in the evaluation report. It is, okay. And then Mike and Abby, there was a request to look at your pre-post tests, which you responded to in the chat. So you're willing to share those. So I guess you'll send a link or something to us or PDFs to us.
Yeah, we will send either PDF or I don't know if we are able to track down the link while we're on the call, but we'll get it to you.
Okay, that sounds great. And then I just wanted to kind of lift up some of the things that I heard. So much good knowledge, but really appreciated Taylor and Martine, you taking the time to record perspective from the ECE providers through the coalition experience. That's really powerful to hear that firsthand, and having her articulate how she didn't feel comfortable speaking up in front of that larger group. And then one of your last slides where you talked about the future, where you really are hoping to have this smaller group of ECE providers take a leadership role, is also very powerful and empowering. So do you want to reflect on that in any other way?
Yeah, I think that it really is a testament to the culture that Martine and I have been able to cultivate in our virtual space. In our first meeting this year, we kind of just like teed up this opportunity of, would you guys like to potentially co-create agendas? And the coalition members said, well, could we co-lead? Could we co-facilitate? And so it's been really amazing to, put the opportunity out there and see the providers like really run with it and really want to step into a leadership role.
And then for IPHI, one of the kind of comments that stood out to me was talking about how, this is kind of a thematic summary of the requests for additional TA. And even, you both mentioned how a lot of these states who took advantage of the 16-hour equity training, a lot of those staff members had some equity training prior. And even after the 16-hour training, you talked about how theoretical knowledge and understanding of the concepts of equity doesn't always translate, right, to working knowledge and operational knowledge. And that's where this intensive 16-hour training comes in, and then subsequent TA when that's possible. I don't know if you want to reflect on that anymore, but I think it is really powerful. I mean, I think a lot of people think about how we're in 2022 and how can we be where we are, but it does speak to the need for operationalizing this knowledge.
Definitely, Kate. And I mean, you know, as we reflect as an organization ourselves, we are going through so many processes to think about how do we integrate racial equity within our organization, right? And as an organization that we provide this training to others, it still takes a lot of external insight sometimes, someone to come in with an external unbiased view to help organizations think through how do you apply this within your structure, within your organization. That is very different to like reading a book that says use this tool. It's use this tool, but think about how do you integrate this tool within your existing structure, right? So thinking about even what we heard from the group in DC, other organizations, you may not be able to take exactly what they did and apply it in your organization. You're going to need to think about what works best within your structure. And sometimes it's hard to do that when you're either really connected to your organization or coalition, and you need to bring an unbiased lens to that work, right? So I am not, even though, you know, quote unquote, you would say quote unquote experts, right? We are not the experts who bring the best lens to applying it within our organization, right? So that technical assistance is so critical to think about how do you take the theory and the knowledge, and even when you've applied it in so many other settings, how do you then do that within your own? And that's where that TA is so necessary.
I was pausing for a second, Mike, to see if you had any further reflections. Amia Oppenheim, who manages the Farm to ECE funding for ASPHN, says, IPHI, when you are working to improve the equity and inclusion into coalitions, are there common pitfalls or key changes that you see and work to help coalitions shift and change their approach?
Yeah, I can start, and Abby, feel free to jump in. One of the things that is, I think we see a lot with the coalitions we work with is, as I was mentioning, as they go through the core workshop, and really, especially when we get to the community participation and power section, I think that really is a light bulb for a lot of folks when they, you know, look at the coalition as it currently exists and recognize that it doesn't necessarily reflect the diversity of, you know, people as well as communities. So in terms of, you know, racial and ethnic, gender diversity, et cetera, as well as diversity in terms of communities across the state. So a lot of the coalitions, you know, understandably are state level representatives who may or may not have a really in-depth understanding at the local level. And, you know, I think everyone recognizes that it's so critical as they're thinking about an equity perspective on their policies, or, you know, on their farm to ECE approach, or one, you know, a focus was on community mini grants, and thinking about, you know, well, do providers in rural areas have the same, you know, access to these grants and the resources to successfully apply for the grants as those from, you know, larger, more urban areas. And so those conversations take place, and the groups then recognize, okay, well, we need to really revisit our coalition, think about who needs to be at the table, how do we get them to the table, and how do we create an inclusive process once they're at the table so that power is shared and their voices are, you know, respected and carry as much weight as other folks around the table. And so I think that's an area that really comes up over and over again around that community participation, power dynamics, sharing power, et cetera. Abby, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that piece about lived experience. And, you know, as Mike is talking about the table, you know, for us, the table is in multiple spaces, right? So it's also, how do you forge those relationships with the communities that have that lived experience and have those voices that will contribute so much to shaping policies and shifting environments and systems. So that we find is one of the biggest pieces that we work on. It's assessing where are their gaps, who is missing from, which voices are missing from this discussion, and how do we build the relationships to ensure that those groups are included in those discussions, and in leadership as well. So that the other piece is that so much of this work takes a lot of time, because it requires trust building and relationship building. But often organizations are, almost looking to hit a checkbox, like, we need to increase the diversity of our coalition. Let's check that off. But in reality, like getting voices, like, keep referencing what we heard in DC, but, having voices of lived experience requires taking time, taking a break, assessing like, what are we doing? What do we need to do differently? And how do we forge relationships to get people to trust us, that when they come to our spaces, their voice is going to be not just heard, but also integrated into our work. That's so critical.
Any wrap-up thoughts, Taylor? I loved your slide about the pause, that the whole slide was the pause, and it made you really feel what Abby was just referring to, how important that is to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, what
things aren't
Abby's saying
working.
about like the time that it takes to build like trust and rapport, and not necessarily safety, but like a sense of braveness every time you show up in a space is like really important. And I love what Abby mentioned about like the checkbox. That was one thing we really didn't want to do, which is why we took time to pause, because so often people are just looking to check that box, but what we're trying to do is move the needle. And so that takes a lot more time.
Thanks for reflecting on that, Taylor. We have a few more chats of gratitude, notes of gratitude in the chat box. So speakers, please be sure to note that. Notes of how insightful some of these comments are and perspectives. And then Terry Green says, if you have a short time to launch a discussion on equity, a 1-hour webinar, for example, such as today's, how might you choose what is important to include? Appreciate how much you fit in. Maybe that's to us. And then, yeah, just lots of notes of gratitude. So thank you very much to all four of you. I know Martine had to step out, but we really appreciate, speaking of valuing time, we really value your time and the experience that you bring to the table. So thank you, Martine, Taylor, Mike, and Abby. And thank you for everybody who stayed to listen to the full talk. And we did record it, so we'll be sending that out. So have a great day, everyone, and take care.
Thanks.